These highlights from the Probate podcast will help you navigate life transitions like a pro. From senior living to estate planning to probate, you'll learn incredibly useful tips. Be sure to like and subscribe to hear more from Sherry Lund and her expert guests.
What a lot of people don't understand is that there's a ton of risk that comes with being bereaved, not only acutely in grief, but long term if you don't feel supported in your grief. So, you're at more risk for mental health conditions like depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder and prolonged grief disorder. You're at more risk for heart conditions and obesity and chronic disease and illness. And some segments of the population, you're even more at risk for dying sooner than what you should. And so
Right.
to be able to intervene and provide coping strategies that can possibly break that level of risk down a little and mitigate it a bit it's so powerful.
It really is. It really is powerful. Couple things I'm jotting down notes as you talk. One is that we need to be careful not to assume somebody has a support system just because they may be popular in their community or whatever. There may be a lot of people that don't know what to say to them. And so while they may be well known or well respected or have a thriving business or whatever social life, that doesn't mean that they feel supported in this loss. And so
The thing about support, and it's very interesting because there's been a lot of studies around support, social support, which is the support that you'll get from your family, friends, church if you're affiliated, community members, things like that, your GP or clinicians or whatever. The thing about support is that even if you think you're giving the support, only the griever gets to determine if that support is actually helpful for them. Are you giving the support at the right time? And is it the right type of support? So there's like all of these factors that we don't really think about. Like we think that we're just giving them the support that we would want to get. But the reality is like trickier than that. You should totally do it, continue to do it all the time. Like don't
yes,
take your foot off the gas pedal on it, but just recognize that some of the hardest times of days when people are grieving the heaviest, often they don't have access to support during those times, which is early in the morning when you get up, late at night before you go to bed. If you're a working adult, right after work, before you have to transition back into like home life duties and stuff. And these are pivotal moments in time where access to support isn't always readily available and accessible, or like holidays when people often have big plans and perhaps your plans have now dramatically shifted and changed. And so it can feel very isolating, even though the support is technically there, it's not in the way that the griever needs it to.
right. And then there's the secondary losses that go along with that, the empty chair and not being invited to certain things because someone is missing. And the other thing I wanted to say about the text is that they communicate that they're not alone, but also they're not weird. Like you're saying things that they may not even be saying to themselves. Subconsciously, they may be feeling like nobody thinks like this. I'm the only one. So your texts are reassuring in that way.
Yeah, we have a text that recommends, or a text that really speaks to what do you do with a loved one's stuff, right, after they die, which plays into kind of probate talks as well. Like, what do you do with clothing and jewelry and furniture and all of those things? And so one of our texts suggests boxing up things and putting it in a closet or a garage or somebody else's garage until you feel emotionally ready to go through that stuff, but that there's no rush to grieving people really get pressured to go through items right away and to handle and wrap up those loose ends right away. One of our texts suggests that there's an alternative way to do that, right? You can still remove things, but maybe box them up and put them in a different location for later. The other thing might be like for people who experience the loss of a child, for example, one of our texts might suggest keeping clothing in a Ziploc bag to be able to smell the scent later. And the amount of grieving parents that text back on that go, oh my gosh, I do this all the time and I thought I was crazy. And it's no, you're not crazy. You're just a grieving mom who misses their child, the smell and the scent and the presence of their child. And to be able to smell them olfactory is one of your quickest ways to memory. And so scent becomes just so huge. That's why if you walk by and you smell somebody who smells like your person or they're wearing your cologne, you instantly get greasy because you're just recognize that scent.
So when somebody reaches out to you and they want to sign up, do they need anything in particular for that? Or it's just as simple as
Just a credit card just to be able to pay the fee. We use PayPal and it's pretty easy and quick. I mean, to me, we have a gentleman who's in Canada and he was gifted HelpText after his parent died. And now it's the number one sympathy gift that he gets. He basically gives HelpText instead of flowers, instead of offering any other type of support. It's just the first thing that he purchases and gives to people. And the cool thing is when you're doing it as a gift, people have as much time as they want to use it. It doesn't have to be used right away. It can be, and even if they do sign up and are like, oh, I'm too raw right now for this, they can stop and start at any time because it's all.
So they can pause the service for a bit.
Yeah, they can. And we see that happen quite a bit where people will stop. Maybe they're going on vacation, or maybe it's during the holiday, or maybe they signed up too soon for them.
Sure.
And then they start again later.
When do you see this service coming into play more? Does it vary with the type of death they experienced, or is it?
About 61% of our user base right now sign up within the 2 months of being bereaved, which is really telling, right? Because it goes to show that at least understanding of it is that attending traditional one-on-one or group support might be too hard to do those types of
Sure.
within the first 2 months of being bereaved, but receiving a text where they don't have to do anything or go anywhere or say anything is actually a much easier form of support to embrace, aside from the support that you'll naturally get from family members and friends.
Right. I can really see that. Yeah. If you say too much, then they'll ask questions and that just opens up a whole can of worms. So you can just read a text and it's totally receiving, isn't it?
Yes.
What are some of, you mentioned miscarriage and cancer. What are some of the situations, I guess is what I want to say, that you address?
I mean, we have almost every kind of cause of death you can think of. So car accident or accidents, drug, alcohol related deaths, cancer, cardio related deaths, COVID, homicide, suicide, sudden unexpected death of an infant or a child, miscarriage, medical termination of pregnancy. We also have like another category. We have all of the major buckets covered, basically.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
really go into like the nuance of, oh, it's this type of cancer, for example,
Sure.
but it's a broad category which you can then select. And then the text will speak to more of the general or more common grief-related experiences for that loss.
Yeah.
However, it brings up a good point, which we do have kind of this section in the sign up flow that allows people to say, I want more texts around these kind of other things like complicated relationship, for example. So maybe your relationship was estranged, but you're grieving and you need support. So, or perhaps you're LGBT or a person of color or dealing with immigration or refugee asylum seeking or multiple deaths, for example. Those are all options that you can select. And then we've got expert contributors that have written about grief in those particular areas. And then those texts will then also be filtered into what you're receiving. So that way you can get a little bit more nuanced there too. We will be launching also like medically aid and dying based texts that can also be selected as an option to receive because it is becoming more accessible to people. But with that also comes a lot of complexity and grief.
And we were talking before the recording started about Maui and what's happening over there. And I thought just briefly that it was interesting that you talked about how you're looking at the culture and what would be sensitive to something like that. So you mentioned earlier that you're looking at Eastern, Western, but really continuing to look at meeting the person that is grieving where they are at, whatever would speak to them and help them. So I just wanted to point that out.
Well,
I think
really, it's that our texts, when we offer a coping strategy, we're really pulling from both Western, Eastern, and Indigenous-based practices because all of them have very strong like healing properties that can really transverse all different cultures. And so like a good example would be we might, in some collectivistic cultures, they really lean heavily on community for support. So they don't really view grief as like an individual experience. They view it as more of a community or family-based experience. And so a coping strategy might call to action something that involves that, whereas Western based is very individualistic. So it might call for like something like journaling. We also, if we're going to bring in an Eastern or Indigenous based practice, we might say something like consider gardening or being in nature barefoot and feeling kind of the elements or using the element in a form of processing your grief, for example, and suggest that they consider any or all of them as options.
And that's why it's nice again with the text, because you can go back. The text may suggest something that's not a good fit for that day, but it might be good a week from now.
To catch the full episode and explore more resources from the Probate Podcast, check the links in the description and be sure to subscribe for more tips each week.